BA in journalism from Humboldt State University and a master's degree in community health from Austin Peay State University. She worked for the American Cancer Society for 15 years. I think I already said that. Okay, we're being recorded. Hopefully everybody's comfortable with that. Just press continue. So thank you very much and welcome to both of you. We look forward to this presentation.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting us to be here. I'm Claire, and you'll get to hear from my wonderful colleague, Kim, just in a little bit. And I'm going to start us off today talking a little bit about how we're advancing the science of Alzheimer's and dementia research, not just at the association, but worldwide. The Alzheimer's Association's work is about both people and science. You heard that lovely introduction. I can't believe that I'm coming up on my 20-year anniversary with the association, and should remind you all I was 13 when I started. But our work is about people and science, the care that we provide to people living with the disease, their care partners, community members, interested community members, but also about the end of Alzheimer's, that desire that we have to really support research in its highest level. Our vision is a world without Alzheimer's disease and all other dementia. And so you're going to hear a little bit about that today. You're going to see a little bit of the landscape of Alzheimer's and dementia science, some highlights in early detection and diagnosis, some latest advances in clinical trials, treatments, and lifestyle interventions, and more. But I do like to start us off with a little bit of level setting. We'll talk about Alzheimer's and dementia, really sort of defining what those words mean. And so when we think of dementia, we really think of it as this umbrella term used to describe these symptoms that have become associated with cognitive impairment, like thinking, memory, behaviors, and these can include those cognitive symptoms as well as those behavioral and psychological symptoms. But dementia is that collection of symptoms. It's the outcome of what that biological change in the brain is doing to our ability to think and remember. Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia, and you can see here there are different types of dementia. There's actually over 70 different types of dementia that cause this kind of cognitive decline. Alzheimer's disease is the most common. And I sort of think of it like flowers, right? So if you think of flowers, that's the dementia, right? But then there's different types of flowers that provide different colors and scents. And so thinking of it that way, that's how we like to think of those different types of dementia. And that's important for us to think of today because we've sort of had this ability to now really look at cognitive decline differently the more we've learned about how the progression of Alzheimer's disease and other dementias occur in the brain. And so we think of it now more as this continuum. Researchers now understand that this cognitive impairment occurs across a continuum spanning many years. And we start off what we consider ourselves to be cognitively unimpaired, but as we age, some individuals will progress to stages of mild cognitive impairment. This is where we see impairment that does not interfere with our activities of daily living. But those biological changes in the brain have started to occur. And so mild cognitive impairment is not necessarily an actuality that you would then develop dementia. So people can progress and have mild cognitive impairment and never advance to a state of impairment that impairs us more of these functions like mild, moderate, and severe dementia. Dementia is defined as an impairment in 2 or more of our cognitive functions, and it really does start to interfere with our activities of daily living, things like bathing and dressing or making your groceries list and going to the grocery store. Mild cognitive impairment is a known risk factor for dementia, but not all individuals who develop mild cognitive impairment will go through dementia. That everyone who experiences dementia will have passed through mild cognitive impairment in an earlier stage. And so this is important because it provides an opportunity for treatment and potential prevention, because if we can prevent new cases of mild cognitive impairment, we can prevent new cases of dementia. And you'll learn later in the program how we have some new evidence that's showing us ways of decreasing our risks of developing mild cognitive impairment. And you'll hear me say that word a lot, risk. What impacts risk, how we can decrease our risks. And really that's because we're in this unfortunate position where what we know today is what's happening in the brain. What we don't know is why. And so what we know really is the things that can decrease our risks, not the things that we can do to prevent Alzheimer's or dementia from occurring. And so there are things that we can change, and there are things that we cannot change that impair our risk. Obviously, we're all getting older every day, whether we like it or not. We can't change our genetics, our race, our ethnicity. But there are some things that have impact on our risk that we do have some control over. Some of these environmental and lifestyle factors, our cardiovascular health, so things like physical activity, diet, social and cognitive engagement, as well as learning new information about how sleep impacts our risk of developing dementia. And so, as well as levels of education, you'll learn a little bit about that as well. And so we will talk more about these, the research regarding some of these risk factors later. But until that day, there's the things that we can do to support someone living with Alzheimer's disease through the current therapeutic therapies that are available for Alzheimer's disease. Just to sort of highlight these, we know that there are two different types of medications that are available. These medications are really available to treat the cognitive symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, and only for Alzheimer's disease, but sometimes they can be used, or they have been used for other types of dementia. But the research that went into getting these approved for the FDA were really people that had Alzheimer's disease. And so the two types, there's the cholinesterase inhibitors, that's your 50-cent word of the day, and glutamate moderators. And so we look at these medications, the cholinesterase inhibitors there's 3 different market names that are available on the market, 3 different brand names, and there's 1 type of glutamate moderator. And to give you a little bit of perspective, the last medication to come on the market was Namenda, memantine, that's the glutamate moderator. Came onto the market in 2003. So just 2 years after I started with the Alzheimer's Association, that was the last time we had a drug approved by the FDA. And so they can, these drugs are not designed to stop or reverse the disease, rather they're cognitive enhancers. They're treating a symptom of the disease, but not necessarily effectively in all individuals. They can support a person's cognition for a time period of anywhere from 6 to 12 months, and some individuals may respond longer. But for the entire time a person is taking them, the amyloid plaque, which is one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease, and the tau tangles continue to form. Brain cells continue to die. And so while they might treat those symptoms, they might slow down those symptoms, or what appears to be those symptoms, they're not changing the end game for that person living with the disease. And so if you think about if you're taking a pain medication, pain can treat pain. For example, if you think about cancer, if you're in pain from cancer, a pain medication can treat the pain, but it's not affecting the cancer. It's not stopping the cancer from progressing. And so it's the same sort of analogy. And it's also important to understand that we really don't know the impact for each individual of these medications. And so and a good analogy for that is if you have high blood pressure and you're taking a medication to treat high blood pressure, we can take a measurement that shows whether or not your blood pressure is impacted from taking that medication. If your blood pressure goes down, we can make an assumption that that medication is doing what it's supposed to do. And unfortunately, without a crystal ball, we can't really see what the person's rate of progression would have been like for something like a cognitive decline. And it's why these therapeutics can be very frustrating for families, because we don't know whether they're working, but we have to make an assumption based on or families have to make a decision on continuing them based on how the person is relating to them, whether or not they're having side effects, and whether or not they're tolerating these medications. And I think the other important piece for this slide is to think about the stages. Not all of these drugs have been approved for all stages of the disease. And so someone who's truly in the early stages of the disease should not be taking the addition of glutamate. The third bullet you see on there is a combination that they've pulled together, a cholinesterase inhibitor like Aricept and the Namenda together to form one pill. That's certainly as the stages progress in the moderate to severe stage, taking medication can be harder for families, for patients living with dementia. And so it just allows that easier opportunity for someone to have to only take one medication. We are seeing some progression in the field as far as the development of new and better therapies, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Like right now, this is I've rearranged my order, so I'm not used to talking about the aducanumab so early, but this is the most exciting thing that we've seen in the last sort of probably 10 years as far as a drug company that's seeking FDA approval for a new medication. And that's from Biogen. We heard earlier in the year that they are ready to seek approval for aducanumab. Aducanumab has come through 2 phase 3 trials. Phase 1 trials are early on. They're in the lab, usually with mice or just under a microscope. The phase 2 trial is with humans, but in a very small sample. So this, in a phase 2 trial, they're going to be looking for dosing. They're going to be looking for safety, looking for all of those possible things that could impact doing a larger scale phase 3 trial, which is going to be your large scale, 800 to more. You'll see some trials that are as high as 9,000. Those are your large phase 3 trials. And Biogen is aducanumab is an anti-amyloid therapy. It's being used in these 2 trials for MCI. Remember earlier we talked about the importance of preventing new cases of MCI, and mild Alzheimer's and dementia. And this was kind of some exciting news for us, because in early 2019, Biogen very quickly halted the trials because they felt that some analysis on a partial data set proved that there would not be a good outcome. And after that happens, the scientists and the researchers really look at those numbers and make a determination about what they were really seeing in this sort of mid data set, this partial data set. And so, to our surprise, after sort of halting this trial very quickly, in October of last year, there was an announcement that they have really looked deeper down at the data, and it showed some promise. And so by the end of last year, they were able to report some of those results at some worldwide conferences. And in March 2020, they launched the launch of the redosing studies started, and by about June, they had submitted to the FDA for regulatory review. In the summer, at the end of the summer, we learned that the FDA has prioritized that regulatory review. And not really surprising, because if you remember earlier, I said that the last medication came to market in 2003. The last medication to make it to FDA approval was in over a decade ago. And so the FDA is looking for hopefully an effective treatment as well. And so we hope to have the results of that rigorous investigation from the FDA by sort of early March of next year to see whether or not this would be a drug that would then be available to consumers for people with early stage Alzheimer's disease or mild cognitive impairment. And so at the Alzheimer's Association, we're working on all types of research priority areas. We're funding, convening, and leading research in a number of these priority research areas, including discovery science, that's your basic science, treatment, obviously like a Biogen study, early detection, and you'll hear me talk a little bit later about biomarkers and how biomarkers are changing the game. And then treatment, and then prevention as well. Because ultimately, that's the end result, is that we want to look at how can we actually stop this progression from happening in the first place. And so while we don't have all the answers today, and it feels sometimes unhopeful, it is an exciting time to think about Alzheimer's disease and dementia research, because there's more and more that we're learning every day. And as I mentioned earlier, biomarkers are a big part of how we're seeing that game being changed. And so biomarkers are really an opportunity for us to move faster in a more effective way to either detect the disease or to see that disease in a person. And so a biomarker is a biological marker. It's a piece of you, whether that's through a brain image, through a fluid like blood, or through different types of markers. So like retinal scans or DNA markers that will help us to understand what's happening to a person. So if you're not familiar with the concept, if you've ever taken a cholesterol test or a blood sugar test, those are biomarkers for heart disease and diabetes. It's simple something that you can measure in a body that tells you about a disease process. And for decades, and since we've sort of been thinking about the first case of Alzheimer's disease that was identified in 1906, there were no biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease. The only way you really knew if you had Alzheimer's is on a brain, to see the brain tissue on autopsy. That's the way Dr. Alzheimer did it in 1906. And up until recently, that's the only way we've been able to do this. Now, we've started to see biomarkers emerge in a research setting for some time now, but now the hunt is on for biomarkers to actually be thinking of not just being used in these research settings, but also being used for diagnosis and other things. And so these things like a PET scan, so you can see here a PET scan, which can actually show you the image of what's working cells in the brain and what's not. And you can see it's such a distinct difference between a cognitively healthy brain and the brain with Alzheimer's disease on a simple image. We see things like the cerebrospinal fluid being used in research to actually detect the presence of specific biomarkers that would identify someone as having Alzheimer's disease. And this is really a global race. And early last year in our Alzheimer's Association International Conference, we learned of some exciting research about a simple blood test. This is so important. And while it's not available for a clinical use today, there is no current test to determine whether or not someone has Alzheimer's disease or other types of dementia. And so to get to find a diagnosis today, it's done by sort of evaluating a history and a physical, to do scans of the brain like an MRI or a CAT scan. But what they're looking for on those tests is something that would be causing the symptoms, something that could rule out that it's Alzheimer's disease or dementia. They're not looking for the sort of hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease, that buildup of amyloid plaque in the brain, those cells that have tangled, the tau proteins that have tangled in the brain. What they're looking for is a tumor or signs of a stroke to rule out anything else. And so what being able to pull together, being able to have a blood test would mean that you would be able to have this true marker of evidence in the brain. And last year at AAIC, there was some really compelling data that showed that these blood draws were as accurate as the PET scanning. And I mentioned a PET scan before. It's important to note that PET scan isn't being used as a regular diagnostic tool in a clinical setting today. It's only being used in research. And then this year at AAIC, we learned even more about another blood marker that allows researchers to see that they're able to differentiate from this blood marker the difference between Alzheimer's or other dementias. So looking at different parts of the brain and thinking about how, so you can see here on the top left hand, it shows you what some of these plaques and tangles, these what we've known as these hallmarks of the disease. The plaques are the amyloid protein deposits that build up in between our brain cells in someone who has Alzheimer's disease. And if you think of our tau protein is a protein that travels across the brain and takes cells with it. It's like a transport system. And in an Alzheimer's brain, that transport system gets derailed, almost like railroad tracks. And that's what causes these tau tangles that build up inside the cells as well. And so there's been lots of research that's looked at whether or not plaques or tangles, the tau protein or the amyloid protein, have equal parts in the cause of Alzheimer's disease, are that if one is more important than the other, and how they're impacted by other types of dementia, like Lewy body dementia or like frontotemporal dementia. And so what's exciting about being able to see this blood biomarker from a tau and the tau protein in it is it actually can not only show us whether or not this could be an Alzheimer's type of dementia, but also could tell the progression of the disease, how late in the stage the disease process is. Otherwise, people are looking at some of these subjective markers for cognitive decline that require us to think about memory and require us to answer memory questions and are really subjective. You can have a bad day and answer some of those questions badly when you might not be as far progressed as a test would indicate, as a subjective test would indicate. So it's helping us to set research even farther. And what that ultimately is going to do is modernize the way we think about diagnosing Alzheimer's disease. And so like I said, we used to only diagnose through these subjective tests, and we still do diagnose through these subjective tests, and oftentimes in the later stages of the disease. So biomarkers are helping us to shift this paradigm through not just brain imaging and biofluid analysis, but through actually being able to see some of these test results that would sort of tell us affirmatively versus just solely relying on history and cognition. This is so important because we believe, we've learned over the last several years that this buildup of the amyloid plaque and the tau protein in the brain is happening in a person's brain up to 20 years or more before symptoms appear. So imagine a future where we have an intervention, a therapeutic intervention that could actually stop that progression. We would want to know about it before we see those cognitive symptoms, and biomarkers will help us get there. So not only will it help in thinking of our future research, but it will also help us to think about it in a clinical setting down the road for diagnosing accurately and in a timely manner someone in a clinical setting that could have Alzheimer's disease or dementia. It's important to know this because we want people to seek out medical attention when they're seeing some of these cognitive symptoms in themselves. About 50% of people who are living with Alzheimer's disease today have never been formally diagnosed for many reasons. Part of it is just not recognizing the symptoms before it's too late to really partake in some of these clinical testing. And we are talking sort of 4 to 5 years before this might be available in a clinical setting, but it's exciting nonetheless, and it's really helping us to look beyond just the laboratory to how this could actually impact day-to-day care and access for people living with dementia as well. Some of the other exciting things that we've learned over the last several years is the importance of understanding race and ethnicity when it comes to Alzheimer's disease and dementia treatments. And because of that, we really focused on thinking about how we need to increase the diversity of our clinical trials. We learned about several studies that have shown that genetic risk factors are different depending on your race. And so it's important for us to think about if we've got a medication that is targeting something like the APOE4 gene, that target for that gene won't work in everybody. And so really having a sort of a way to strategize recruitment for participation in Alzheimer's and related dementia clinical trials is of utmost importance. And because it's not just about the genetic piece of the disease, we're learning more and more about those socioeconomic, behavioral, and cultural risk factors as well. So one of the studies that came out of the Alzheimer's Association International Conference this year looked at vaccinations and dementia. And the study suggests that flu and pneumonia vaccinations may be associated with a lower risk of Alzheimer's disease. One study found that one single flu shot was associated with a 17% lower prevalence of Alzheimer's disease. And so the earlier of age that people had these vaccinations played a role in the maximum benefit. So people who received their first flu shots at age 60 benefited more than those who received their first flu shot at age 70. Another study looked at looked at both vaccinations of people who had flu shots as well as pneumonia vaccinations. So there was one study that looked specifically at pneumonia vaccinations that saw people that had a flu vaccination or a pneumonia vaccination between ages 65 and 75 had a 40% reduced risk of developing dementia or Alzheimer's. And those who had both the flu and pneumonia vaccinations were associated with an even greater risk reduction. And this is important because we want to make sure everybody has access to these types of vaccinations as well. One of the other studies that came out of Alzheimer's Association International Conference looked at these cardiovascular risk factors. So this particular study looked at the higher body mass index between the ages of 20 and 49 may be associated with higher life dementia risk. And so this is helping us to look at how we're framing brain health. And that brain health isn't just something we should be thinking of as older adults, but from early age as well. That women had a 1.8 times higher risk of developing dementia if they were overweight and 2.5 times higher risk if they were obese. And there was also studies that looked at these cardiovascular risk factors specifically in African American youth as well. We know that African Americans have a higher risk of developing dementia. They're 2 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. And they're also at a higher risk of these cardiovascular risk factors compared to other racial and ethnic groups from adolescent through adulthood. And so this was a study that looked at 700 African Americans and found that high blood pressure and diabetes, or a combination of multiple heart health related factors, are common in adolescence and are associated with that worse late life cognition. And so this is leading us to really look at all of these lifestyle interventions and what a future towards what a future therapeutic or future brain health would really look like. And we believe that a future therapy is going to include not just the medicines that we hope get developed and hope come to market that can change some of these biological changes happening in the brain, but also looking at a combination of these lifestyle interventions, that it would almost be like a combined therapy, that you would do these heart healthy, brain healthy lifestyle changes as well as looking at what these medications could provide. I want to talk through a few of these that have had some really good benefit. And so I mentioned earlier about the health disparities, or I mentioned earlier about the African Americans having a higher risk, having that also that higher risk of cardiovascular. It's also been seen in education levels that there's sort of this growing body of longitudinal evidence that shows us that the differences in decline, the differences in racial decline aren't after the cognition decrease starts, but that it's more likely due to their cognitive level prior to the decline of dementia. So looking at education levels, looking at some of that, some of those opportunities for learning has impact on how the decline, once the decline starts, how the cognitive decline goes. So where we're starting is important. The cognitive level you're at before you start to develop any cognitive decline is important, because what it's showing is that there's no change. The rate of progression doesn't change based on your race. It changes based on maybe where you started. So lots of these studies are starting to come out to emerge that show what these risk factors and how these risk factors are associated with levels of cognition. And that's really important to think about as we start thinking about some of these lifestyle interventions. It's also just a quick word about what kind of medications are also being evaluated for people who are living with Alzheimer's disease. And so while we're going to talk about some studies that think about these lifestyle interventions, these are things we can do today to decrease our risks. We also want to think about the quality of life for people that are living with dementia today, because while we would hope that our need for effective treatment or cure is sooner rather than later, those 5.5 million Americans living with Alzheimer's disease today most likely won't benefit from that type of a treatment. And so we want to ensure that they have the highest quality of life possible. And so a lot of our research today is focused on these behavioral and psychological medications that are helping those symptoms of dementia. They're a major quality of life problem for people living with dementia. And currently the medications that are being used today have never been tested in the dementia population, and are actually considered to be not appropriate for people living with dementia. So researchers continue to develop these types of medications that are actually being tested for things like aggression, agitation, hallucinations and delusions in people living with dementia, which is really, really important to ensure that they're safe and effective in this population. So I want to switch gears a little bit as we sort of round out the end of our slides here and really focus on what we're learning about those lifestyle interventions, because while the race is on for us to find that effective treatment, we also want to learn what it is that we can all do today that can decrease our risk of developing dementia. And there's been several trials that have helped us focus on certain key activities around healthy diet, physical activity, cognitive stimulation, as well as some other lifestyle changes that would decrease our risk of developing dementia. This was from a study that came out from AAIC in 2019 that looked at these particular lifestyle factors. So in this particular study, it looked at diet, exercise, smoking, cognitive stimulation, and the intake of alcohol. And it showed how even with the associated risks from genetics, and I should mention that when we think about genetics and Alzheimer's, it's a pretty low genetic risk. So it's about 5% of people living with Alzheimer's disease have what we call the truly familial type of Alzheimer's disease that is associated to the highest genetic risk. When you have genes like the APOE4 gene that I mentioned earlier, it certainly puts you at an increased risk, and you can have either 0, 1, or 2 copies of that gene. Obviously, if you have one, you're at a little bit higher risk than if you have two. But what's really interesting about the genes and why it's so important for us to understand how these genes work is that you can have the APOE4 gene and never develop Alzheimer's disease, and you cannot have it and develop Alzheimer's disease. So it's not the only factor in play, which is why these healthy lifestyle factors are so important, and really the evidence is starting to bubble up around them. And so you can see here that if you combine 2 or 3 of these factors together, you're looking at a 39% lower risk of developing dementia. And if you're combining 4 or 5 of those factors together, you could be looking at a 59% lower risk of developing dementia. And like I said earlier, this may even offset those risks associated with having 1 or 2 copies of that APOE4 gene. Now, one of these cardiovascular risk factors really was studied in a high group of people, a large group of people several years ago, that looked at blood pressure. And if there's one thing you can take away from today's presentation, it's the importance of how managing these cardiovascular risk factors are in managing your risk of developing cognitive impairment. So the SPRINT-MIND study was a study that was conducted to demonstrate the reduction of potential new cases of cognitive impairment. This was a study that was done in over 9,000 people ages 50 and older who were all considered to be at dementia risk for one way or another. There were 2 arms of this intervention, both a standard and an intensive arm of this intervention, where the people in the standard their blood pressure was monitored and kept at about 140 systolic, which at the time was considered to be normal blood pressure. And then there was an intensive treatment group that was encouraged to either make some changes to their diet, and with the potential increase of addition of a blood pressure medication, monitored and kept their systolic blood pressure at 120. What they found was there was a dramatic reduction of small vessel disease on an MRI in the intensive treatment. So those that were in the intensive treatment had a 19% reduced risk of developing mild cognitive impairment, a 17% reduced risk of developing dementia, and when they looked at mild cognitive impairment and dementia combined, they had a 15% reduced risk. After about 2 years into this trial, that was a 7-year study, they actually stopped the standard treatment arm because the results were looking so good in the 120 systolic arm, in the intensive arm, that they felt it was unethical to hold people at a higher blood pressure. And so what this shows us is that things like these cardiovascular risk factors have an absolute impact on decreasing our risks of cognitive impairment. And you remember I mentioned earlier about the importance of reducing those new cases of mild cognitive impairment because we're reducing new cases of dementia. And you see here that just by monitoring our blood pressure, we could potentially reduce our risk of developing mild cognitive impairment by 19%. And while the hope of looking at both dementia and mild cognitive impairment together wasn't considered to be statistically significant, there was some question about whether or not that was because of the length of time that the study went on, because dementia is a slower progression of a disease, that they didn't study these people long enough to really see a positive outcome. And so this has led the researchers to continue this through what they're calling SPRINT-MIND 2.0, which will actually be able to clarify that impact on dementia with a 2-year follow-up. And so they're going to go back and contact 7,000 of the additional people. And they're also going to be able to add people younger than the age of 65 or younger than the age of 60 in this second round of this study. So we're really excited to see the outcome of this study, to see how it has maybe an impact on dementia as well as just mild cognitive impairment. And so there's sort of this synergy right now that's looking at all of these things combined, and we've seen them all studied independently really well, really successfully. We've seen that there are diet studies, that there are physical activity studies and cognitive and social stimulation studies. But what happens when we put all of these things together? We saw some early findings in a few slides earlier where it showed that doing multiple factors together has maximum benefit. And so this just leads us to know that there are things that we can do today to reduce our risk of developing mild cognitive impairment and dementia. And they're especially around those cardiovascular risk factors. So this provides us with an immediate opportunity for thinking about those life-changing impact. And the Alzheimer's Association is committed to doing this, and so much so that they are embarking on a huge nationwide study to protect brain health through lifestyle intervention to reduce risk, called US Pointer. US Pointer is a 2-year multi-center randomized clinical trial that will have 2 intervention groups, both a self-guided and a structured lifestyle group, that would hopefully answer the question of what will happen if we layer on an additional components of lifestyle intervention approach to reduce our risk for cognitive decline. This landmark study is hoping to answer this question. And it's also going to be geographically represented throughout the United States, 2,000 participants at 5 sites throughout the US, ages 60 to 79 years old, with what we consider to be suboptimal lifestyles. So if any of you know Kim Coelho, she's a marathon runner. I can tell you right now that Kim is not eligible to participate in the US Pointer study, even if she was old enough, which she's not. But if she was old enough, we're looking for people that haven't led these types of healthy lifestyles to see what kind of impact we can make. And so what's interesting about this is that there'll be different formats, different expectations and accountability, but we'll see the results of what happens of both a self-guided lifestyle intervention. They'll be given the information and sort of encouraged to do it on their own, versus an intensive structured lifestyle intervention where they get health coaching, where they get weekly groups and ways to sort of encourage that physical exercise, a healthy diet, cognitive and social activities, as well as monitoring things like blood pressure and other health monitoring that could reduce our risk. And what's amazing about this is that it could, if the trial results are possible, an accessible and sustainable community-based lifestyle program for risk reduction will have been developed through this trial. So we're really excited to see the results. You might have seen on that map that Northern California does have a little icon, and the study is happening here at UC Davis, just outside of Sacramento. So if people are in the greater Sacramento area, they may be eligible to participate in the US Pointer trial. But US Pointer isn't just about the United States. This was a trial that was actually taken from new information several years ago from something called the Finger trial in Finland. And what the Alzheimer's Association is doing is pulling together now the world to see if we can provide this type of lifestyle intervention data for the entire world. And what you'll see here, and actually this is a pretty outdated map because we have some fairly substantial, I think Canada is now implementing already. They've moved from the planning to the implementation phase, and some other countries on there have now turned purple. But you'll see here that this is bringing the world together for this effort through something called Worldwide Fingers to address these risk factors in a way that makes sense for people where they are and in a culturally competent way. And so we're really excited to see how that progresses. And this is important because we really do have to do something today to change the trajectory of this disease. If we can develop a treatment by 2025 that can delay the onset of Alzheimer's disease by just 5 years, as many people as have the disease today would not develop it by 2050. And ways that people can get involved and learn more about how they can be part of that is through clinical trials. And we have a great program called Trial Match. If you are interested in learning more about clinical studies, this is a matching service that helps to connect people to a study that's appropriate for them. And if you're interested in learning more and more about research, I would highly encourage you to download our Alzheimer's Association Science Hub app. This is an app that will give you the latest and greatest information, as well as the science behind some of these fast facts that seem to have the greatest cure, the fast sort of results, all of those things. It puts the science behind them so that you can see the evidence to support or not support sort of some of those latest and greatest. If it seems too good to be true, it might be things that you see on television or read on the internet. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kim, who's going to talk to you for a few minutes. And then we're going to really open it up for some questions and some Q&A. And in between myself and Kim speaking, I will go into the chat and have a look at what you, if there have been any questions in there. So Kim, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Claire. I'm going to get my screen here and share it. 1 second here. All right. Thanks for being with me today and Claire, and thank you so much, Claire. Wonderful information. So I work locally, as they mentioned in my introduction. So I'm the community engagement manager for the Alzheimer's Association here. So I work with a volunteer committee to plan the Walk to End Alzheimer's, which is held every year the second week in October.
Kim, your
So today,
screen is not, Kim? Your
yes.
screen is not being shared.
Okay, let me see here. Okay. Let me go back and share screen. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that.
No worries.
And share.
There we go.
Still learning all this technology, unfortunately. So. And okay, how about that?
Perfect.
Yay. All right, so you guys heard that part. So today I'm going to tell you more about the mission of the Alzheimer's Association and how you can help millions of people nationwide who are currently affected by this devastating disease. So blink twice, another person in the world has just developed Alzheimer's disease. These are our parents, our friends, our siblings, our coworkers. Alzheimer's and dementia impacts individuals and their families, often requiring years of caregiving and expenses. The disease not only steals memories and moments, but whole identities and ultimately lives. This isn't just their fight, it's everyone's fight. This is why it's so important to continue to move our mission forward. So some of you might be wondering, who is the Alzheimer's Association? What do we do? But more importantly, you might be wondering why. So why do we exist and why are we here today? The Alzheimer's Association leads the way to end Alzheimer's and all other dementias by accelerating global research, driving risk reduction and early detection, and maximizing quality of care and support. Our vision is a world without Alzheimer's and all other dementias. And I think I skipped one slide here. There we go, making an impact. So the association provides support groups, education programs, and other activities to help people navigate the disease, all completely supported by donations made possible through Walk to End Alzheimer's and all other association events. And even more so now that a lot of us are having to join Zoom calls and other online platforms. So we're able to provide educational programs and support groups in a way that we weren't able to before. The Alzheimer's Association has made funding research a priority in order to slow and one day stop this disease. The association has granted over $167 million to more than 500 leading international research projects working towards methods of treatment and prevention. The Alzheimer's Association, we're also the leading voice of Alzheimer's disease advocacy, fighting for critical Alzheimer's research and care initiatives at the state and federal level. As an organization, we may only reach a portion of our affected community with our services, but through advocacy, legislative efforts, we know we can reach 100% by connecting volunteer advocates to the policymakers who can make a difference. One way we do this is through the Alzheimer's Association Impact Movement, or AIM. So our volunteer advocates inform participants about AIM at our Walked Into Alzheimer's events. So what is AIM? So AIM is a separately incorporated advocacy affiliate of the Alzheimer's Association. AIM works to secure policies to overcome Alzheimer's and dementia, including increased investment in research, improved care and support, and development of approaches to reduce the risk of developing dementia. So working at the state and federal level, AIM advances the public policy priorities of the Alzheimer's and dementia community. So we operate as a 501c4. By doing this, we're able to further engage with lawmakers. AIM works to encourage elected officials and candidates to make Alzheimer's a national priority. AIM gives the Alzheimer's and dementia community enhanced influence and Alzheimer's and make our voices heard. So thanks to the support of the members of AIM, AIM has driven policymakers to take historic steps, including nearly tripling the research funding at the National Institute of Health in just 5 years. We've provided access to care planning services through Medicare and discussing policy plans to support those living with Alzheimer's and dementia on the campaign trail. So to join AIM, you would just go to alzimpact.org/join. So there's a yearly membership fee of $20 for AIM. So some of you may be familiar with the impact this disease has on its families. Alzheimer's takes a big toll on people nationwide. It's important to also remember that Alzheimer's is not just an elderly person's issue, it's a family issue. Approximately 25% of caretakers are in the sandwich generation. They're caring for an aging parent and children under the age of 18. 18.5 billion hours of unpaid caregiving is provided and valued at over $234 billion. And Alzheimer's is the most expensive disease in the US. By 2050, it could cost the nation as much as $1.1 trillion. So not only is Alzheimer's impacting families, but it's also having an effect in the workplace. If you have an employee that's a caregiver, your company is being impacted by this devastating disease. With Alzheimer's diagnosis on the rise and the challenges presented by COVID-19, this is an extremely difficult time for not only those with the disease, but for caregivers and supporters too. Please know that the Alzheimer's Association is here for you through our 24/7 helpline. You can also find additional resources on our website and guidance specifically related to COVID-19 at alz.org/COVID-19. So one of the saddest comments that was shared with us on one of our staff calls was from assisted living home administrators, is that the staff are saying they're helping to save their residents from COVID, but then losing them to loneliness. So how do we help? Locally, we provide virtual lunch and learn to employees. We have virtual support groups that I mentioned and educational programs. Caregivers can apply for respite grants. We can set up care consultations. They can be scheduled. Online message boards through ALZ Connected. It's a free service that allows those living with the disease and their caregivers to exchange information and build relationships. So now that we've talked about the why, let's talk about how. Everybody on this call has the potential to engage their friends, family, employees, coworkers by putting together a Walked Into Alzheimer's team. So here is the Sequoia Senior Living team at last year's walk. For many of you on the call today, this might be your first time hearing about the Walked Into Alzheimer's. This event takes place not just in our community here, but in 650 communities throughout the country. Walked Into Alzheimer's, our signature event of the Alzheimer's Association, plays a significant role in helping the association advance its mission. So much has changed this year. I'm sure with lots of events that you folks have attended, and now you have to do it virtually, and we're kind of doing the same, but we've done a good job with figuring out how to do our event this year. So this year, our walk is going to be on every sidewalk, trail, and track. So your safety and health are a top priority. So we aren't going to have a big, large in-person gathering like we've had in the past. Instead, we invite teams to walk with their friends and family in the community while others do the same. So the day of walk, we would, for those folks that are participating, they're going to log on to an online platform called the Walk Main Stage at 9 in the morning. We'll email all participants a link how to get there. They're going to watch the opening and promise garden ceremonies, which is about half an hour long. Then they're going to go outside and take a walk with their team. They're going to hopefully wear their walk gear if they've earned one of our shirts, walk with these Alzheimer's flags that have been sent out to participants or will be mailed out soon. And then you can go visit one of our Humboldt County view-only promise gardens. And volunteers have been working really hard setting these up in all these different communities so that no matter where you live and where you're walking, you would be able to go by one of these gardens. So the promise gardens, if you're unfamiliar with them, they're made up of flowers in 4 different colors that represent a participant's relationship to the disease. So we normally, when you're at one of our events, we give flowers to everyone who participates and they plant them in these promise gardens. But since we're not doing that this year, it's just view only, so you can walk by and see these. So the 4 different colors of flowers, so we have the yellow flower. They're given to caregivers who are caring for someone with Alzheimer's. We give the purple flower to folks that have lost someone to the disease. The orange flower is given to those that don't have a personal connection to the disease, but still support and advocate for a world without Alzheimer's. And the blue flower is given to those that are currently living with Alzheimer's disease. And then we have a white flower. We don't give this out, but we, it's representing the first survivor of Alzheimer's disease. So if any of you on the call have been to the Relay for Life in Humboldt County before, you see all the survivors take the first lap. There was, when I was managing that event, we had like 600 survivors, and they would get on the track and it would be very emotional. And I can't wait till we can do that with Alzheimer's, that we're giving those white flowers out to the Alzheimer's survivors. So I'm going to highlight a few of the helpful tools for fundraising this year. We have the Walk mobile app for your iPhone or Android. It'll help you track your fundraising progress. You can send text messages asking for donations, manage your Facebook fundraiser, and even deposit check deposits towards your fundraising goal. Traditionally, participants that use this app raise 3 times more than folks that don't. Plus, the app's even more important this year because we'll be adding in the ability to track your steps on walk day. You'll be able to track your progress along a virtual walk route and share your progress on social media and listen to motivational messages. And one other good fundraising tool is the Facebook fundraiser. So it's a great way to share your story using social media. When you start a Facebook fundraiser from your Walked Into Alzheimer's Participant Center, your fundraiser is automatically synced between Facebook and the webpage. Your Facebook friends can donate to your walk campaign without even leaving Facebook. And by sharing your fundraiser on Facebook, you'll reach friends and acquaintances that you might not be able to. And since walk is everywhere this year, we've been able to invite country to participate in the Humboldt County Walk. So I have a brother and sister-in-law in Arizona, and they're part of my walk team. They just started fundraising, about 36 hours ago, and have already raised, I think it was 1,100 as of this morning. So, and, like most of us, asking for money isn't a fun thing to do, but when you're doing it for a cause like this, it's a lot easier. And my sister-in-law commented before she started, she's like, well, I'm hoping to get to 100, and, very pleasantly surprised how quickly folks want to give to this cause. So And then we have different incentives. So if you earn, if you raise $100, you get the walk shirt. If 500, you get the walk t-shirt with the medal. If you raise 1,000, you've got the soft tea there and the other items. And then 2,500, you're considered our elite grand champion. You get the pullover and all the other items. So I want to just mention two of our presenting sponsors this year. So, Edward Jones has been our national presenting sponsor since 2016, and they just announced in July of 2020 that they're renewing their partnership with the Alzheimer's Association, committing $25 million more over the next 5 years. So this commitment matches the $25 million already raised by Edward Jones in its associates and clients since launching in 2016. So their $50 million investment is the largest commitment ever received by the Alzheimer's Association from a corporate partnership. Edward Jones realizes how important it is to, especially they work with a lot of older clients, so they definitely know this is a really important issue. And then CVS came on board this year. So they're part of our national team program. In 2019, CVS made a 3-year, $10 million commitment, including customer fundraising, caregiver support, and the Walk National presenting sponsorship. So, and here is all our wonderful local Humboldt County sponsors. So if you're out doing business, you know, just give them a shout out, thank them for supporting this event. So we talked about what Walked Into Alzheimer's is about, and now we're going to talk about the why. So partnering with Walk, especially during these uncertain times, can be that opportunity to bring your family, friends, coworkers together in the fight against Alzheimer's. You can have fun planning fundraising activities, or even better, have friendly competition between teams. So pictured here below is the Amos Ranch Ramblers, captained by Melinda and Rachel Dammy. So both have lost their maternal grandparents to Alzheimer's within the last couple of years. So to sign up, it's pretty easy. Make this event really easy. Just Google ALZ Humboldt Walk, or you can go to alz.org/walk and find the Humboldt Walk. Registration is free. There's no limit to the size of your team. All right, thank you. And all right. And do we have questions for me or Claire?
So thanks, Kim. So I answered one of the questions in the chat about where to go to get one of these blood tests or a PET scan. And so if you're looking to get a diagnosis, I would recommend either starting with your primary care physician or asking your primary care physician for a referral to maybe a neurologist. But you could also, it's a great opportunity for you to use an online service we have called communityresourcefinder.org, which can help to link you to all kinds of community services, including diagnosis, or call the helpline. Because if you get the helpline, we can actually look through our lists of places that we know in the area or close to your home that are providing that kind of diagnosis and information. But just as a reminder that those PET scans and the blood tests right now are not available for clinical use. They're only being used unfortunately in research. And then another follow-up question was about whether or not some of these I'm just reading at the same time. This is why I was saying to Kim beforehand, I couldn't manage the chat while I was presenting, because I have to get really close to my screen to be able to see it. So they mentioned about the Dale Bredesen protocol, and one of the things that I mentioned in the beginning is that the Alzheimer's Association is an organization that's been based on science. Dr. Bredesen's intervention has not been through thorough, rigorous testing. It has not been tested through the FDA requirements. There's actually no evidence to suggest that it works beyond the original, I think, 9 people that participated in a very, 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 very small, think about Sprint Mind, 9,000 people. So we would not recommend something like that protocol. We would recommend that you would look, and it's sort of like being a savvy consumer. If you ever, my 81-year-old father lives with me, and we spend a lot of time watching Judge Judy. If you watch Judge Judy, you know that there's all of those ads for the memory, you know, improve your memory. Most of those, if not all of them, have a disclaimer on the bottom that they've not been tested through the FDA, and there's actually no evidence to show that they improve memory. So just be a savvy consumer and really look at the science behind, and that's where that science app, or just calling the 800 number, and if you have questions, and we can answer those questions. And I'm seeing, so somebody asked about whether or not they can participate in a trial. The easiest way to find out is if you can qualify for a trial is to either create a profile on clinicaltrials.org, call the 800 number, and we can help you through that, or to go onto something like clinicaltrials.gov and find out what's happening in your local community. I will also say that there are many trials that are happening where they're looking for healthy subjects to test things online, to participate in caregiver surveys. So it's not always for the person with a disease, but sometimes we need those healthy subjects as well. So it's always worth participating in a clinical trial. Kim mentioned about the research funding that we've seen so wonderfully go up over the last several years due to this amazing advocacy work of our advocates. And research funding is certainly the #1 barrier to finding a cure. And even with this advanced funding, it's still a barrier to finding a cure. The #2 reason for these treatments is participation in clinical trials. So the more people that can participate in a clinical trial, the better. I don't see any other new questions in the chat. Are there other questions that people want to ask? Jane?
I have a question. If we go to a local neurologist, and I think there are 1 or 2 here locally, do they have the ability to do the PET scans or the APOE tests here locally?
So, a PET scan would not be used because they're not being covered by insurance in clinical setting. You would have to pay privately for a PET scan. And I can look, Jane, to see whether or not there are physicians in your area that are doing PET scans, but one would need to pay for that privately. It's not covered by insurance at this current time. Now, there is another study that I didn't talk about called the IDEAS trial that's actually trying to justify the need for PET scans to be covered in the diagnosis process, and the evaluation of that is being looked at now, and it was actually a study that was done in participation with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They funded the study because we believe that an early and accurate diagnosis in the earliest stage possible over time will improve health outcomes as well as decrease costs. And so we've been able to show that it improves health outcomes, and they're now evaluating the data to see if it can decrease costs. That's still yet to be determined. And so until CMS approves those tests, you'd have to pay privately to get a PET scan. But I can certainly find out whether or not there's one happening locally from your area.
Does that mean then that all local diagnoses are based on behavioral symptoms only?
So,
cognitive and behavioral?
And that's for everybody. That's not just related to where you live, but right now, the way we diagnose for Alzheimer's disease is by ruling out anything else. So they would do something like a CAT scan or an MRI. They would look for either a brain tumor or maybe look for changes in the brain that could have been caused by a stroke to rule out a stroke or rule out a brain tumor. They're going to also do a test like the mini mental state exam. Has anyone ever had to participate in one of those where they ask you to count backwards from 100 by sevens? I can only get to 86. Start practicing now. They'll ask you to remember 3 objects, those sorts of subjective tests. And then they do like a complete history and physical, and will essentially rule out anything else and make a probable diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And that's why things like the blood test for research is so important, because we need to find a cost-effective, easily available, readily available in every community, just like you would go and get a blood test for cholesterol. We want to have that kind of rigorous test for dementia as well. And research is closer than ever to finding that.
And the
Got a
APO
question.
can be gotten locally, I believe.
I'm sorry, Jane, I didn't hear you.
The APOE4 test, I think you can get locally without a problem.
So let's talk about that a little bit. And then we're going to go to, I think, is it Lewis has a question next?
Yes.
So genetic testing is not something that the Alzheimer's Association would necessarily recommend. And here's why. You can have the gene and never develop the disease. You cannot have the gene and develop the disease. And so what those genetic testings tell you are that you are at a more increased risk. And what we don't know about those genetic tests, though, is how they impact things like health insurance and life insurance and all of those things. And so people really don't understand what those tests are. They're not going to tell you that yes, you're going to develop Alzheimer's, or no, you're not. And so we would only recommend that you get a genetic testing if your family has the dominantly inherited type of Alzheimer's disease. And that's where every member in your family under the age of 65 either developed or died from Alzheimer's before the age of 60. Truly the highest inherited. It's a very unique gene, and you would most likely be in a clinical trial already if your family had that disease, because it's so very rare. And so Lewis, I think you had a question?
I did. You talked earlier about this new Biogen.
Yeah.
That sounds very promising. How can we, as lay people, keep track of this, and when and if it becomes available? I mean, what's the way to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would suggest if you do have access to a smartphone and you can download the Science Hub app, that's the first way. If you don't have access to a smartphone, I would say to stay connected with the Alzheimer's Association, whether it's through attending some of our programs or events, because we will be the first to shout from the mountaintop when there's a new treatment. We will be the first to let people know the evidence behind it, to show the outcomes, and to help people get connected. So if you can find ways to stay connected to us, you'll be able to get that news. We have lots of communications that go out that would allow you to see that.
And what is that Alzheimer's website, association website?
Sure, it's alz.org. O-R-G. And Kim, can you put that in the chat?
Yes, I will do that.
Okay.
And then we had another, okay, Caroline, I think you've been trying to ask a question.
Yeah, first of all, I wanted to thank you. You did a very nice job. I wanted to answer a couple of Jane's questions. I'm a physician in town, and what we do is somebody who's complaining, we always like to joke that if somebody is complaining of having some cognitive problems, that they don't have Alzheimer's yet, but they might have mild cognitive development, no problem, no issue, that's true. But the first thing we do is we do the mini mental status exam that Claire mentioned. We also do blood tests because you can have hypothyroidism, low B12, folate deficiencies that can also cause cognitive impairment. we do start people on these medications, which have not been shown to do a whole lot. You know, it goes back to what Claire says. They're, you know, we'll use them, but they really don't do a lot. I mean, they're kind of a nice way for a physician to say, okay, yeah, here's something for you, you know. The other thing is there's some really nice dementia clinics at Stanford at UCSF too. So they do some really good work down there. I've sent lots of people to them. But I'm with you, Claire. It's all about prevention. It's, you know, let's, you know, keep our bodies, keep our diet, keep our cognition going strong. And that really does help to prevent some of these cognitive declines. But anyway, that's why I wanted to mention that to you, Jane, because you asked. And you know, we do not do PET scans. We definitely do MRIs to rule out any, you know, major pathology going on, but PET scans are not used at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other?
And then I do have another question, which is, do you actually have a program where you basically say, do the following or don't do the following if you want to avoid cognitive decline? In other words, here is an ideal way to live in order to avoid Alzheimer's.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jane. So the evidence is emerging, right? And we've learned about healthy lifestyles. I mean, part of it, I sit here and think, well, it's common sense, right? These are all good cardiovascular risk factors, and 25% of our blood pumping from our heart goes to our brain. So it makes sense that what's good for the heart is good for the brain. But, and we do have a program which you can attend online called, because none of our programs are meeting in person right now, called Healthy Living for Your Brain and Body. And it kind of walks through those 4 quadrants, that the diet, the exercise, the cognitive and social stimulation, as well as monitoring those numbers like blood pressure and blood sugar. And sort of gives you some practical tips on how to do that, how to do all of that together. And then, but the evidence is growing, and so there's not like a prescription yet that we could say, if you do this amount of exercise and this amount of change to your diet, eating these foods, that you'll reduce your risk. But that's what we hope to get from the study, the US Pointer study. So that kind of science is emerging all the time. And until then, things like Healthy Living for Your Brain and Body, and we've got those coming up on an ongoing basis on our virtual education calendar that anybody can attend, and they're free of charge and they're great information.
Do you coordinate it all with people like Dr. Mark Hyman at the Cleveland Clinic, who has written extensively about the brain and obviously perhaps hasn't done clinical studies, but has a wealth of clinical information based on the patients that have gone through their clinic?
Yeah, so we work very closely. Dr. Connor mentioned UCSF. I'm based down in the Bay Area, but we have offices all throughout Northern California and Northern Nevada. We work with our local medical, either physicians or researchers in those local communities who either partner with us on educational programs or speak at support groups and things like that, so that families get to hear from the scientists, from the experts in the field on treatment and prevention and diagnosis. Like Dr. Connor mentioned, it's really important people understand the diagnosis process, how that goes, how people go about getting diagnosed, so they know what steps to take. So we do work extensively with our local community. We're not working with the Cleveland Clinic here in this area, but we certainly work with those that are based in our community.
So you work with Dr. Michael Merzenich, who basically established neuroplasticity, etc.
I mean, I can't say personally whether or not I'm working with him. I mean, we work with, my team works with so many people throughout the area. That's popping out in my head, but.
Are there there are a couple questions on a couple of things that you've answered in the chat, but not everybody is on the chat. So I just thought it might be helpful just to kind of read those questions and answers.
Sure.
Do you want to do that?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the questions came as to whether or not that Alzheimer's disease is caused by a virus, and as of today, there's no evidence that it has been caused by a virus. But there are so many research projects going on right now that are really trying to leave no stone unturned, and there certainly is work being done in the world of virus and in the world of infections to see whether or not any evidence can emerge for that. There was a question about the figures of the percentage of people with Alzheimer's over the age of 65. So currently it's 1 in 9 over the age of 65 will develop Alzheimer's disease, and 1 in 3 over the age of 85 will develop Alzheimer's disease. And we say develop because, like I said, about half of the people living with Alzheimer's disease have actually never been to get a formal diagnosis. And so we know that there's much work to be done in the world of health systems and access to good diagnosis and practice. And that sort of leads into the next question, which Dr. Connor, that people want to know where you practice, if you have a practice, and are you local to accept patients?
I am not right now practicing. I left practice about a year ago, and I'm now doing mostly teaching and working with the new family practice residency.
Which is so great.
Yeah. So yeah.
And then someone asked for the virtual education calendar. It is on the website, and I can actually put in a link to download the document. So I'll do that while more questions might be gathering.
Thank you, Claire. And then I posted if you go to the Humboldt County Locked Into Alzheimer's Facebook group, I have it listed there too.
Oh,
as an
great.
announcement.
Oh,
so
that's probably an easier way for people to find it.
I had a question, Claire. Have there been any looks into CRISPR? You know what CRISPR is? It's the gene splicing. Have there been any? Do you have any idea if there's been any look into that?
I mean, there might have been, but I don't know.
It's a definitely new upcoming way of dealing with abnormal genes. We should probably do a brown bag discussion on it.
Yeah, right.
Do you know if there's anything, what kinds of studies the NIH is doing with their funding now, which they now have?
Yeah, so I mean, I couldn't, there's so much funding that's being done by the NIH in the work of Alzheimer's and dementia. We have many of our great sites across Northern California and Northern Nevada that receive that funding to be able to do that work. I mean, you'd have to look on their website to get the specifics of who's getting funding from where. But they're certainly funding good work. And what I love about the association is we work in, the NIH tends to fund more seasoned scientists that have a lot of that evidence, right? I don't want to say the sure thing, but certainly things that have some good evidence behind them. And where the Alzheimer's Association can be helpful is sometimes we'll fund some of this newer research that has maybe a smaller area, but a lot of potential legs. And so it's a nice combination so that we're making sure that we're not just looking at amyloid plaque, or we're not just looking at the tau protein. We're looking at all of these other things that could be playing in a role. And I think over the last 10 years, we've learned so much more about the disease itself than we ever imagined we could. But because it's the brain, because it's you know, you can't just open up someone's skull and take a look at it like you'd be able to see a measure from blood pressure. It's harder to do, right? It's a little bit more challenging, and so it's not surprising that it's taking a little bit longer.
Is there a time frame for when they think they're going to have blood tests?
They estimate sort of 4 to 5 years that a blood test would be available. What I learned about the blood test this summer, because last year that data sort of emerged, that it's showing, and what they do to show whether or not it's working is they compare it to the scans, right? So they'll do a scan and see that they can get the same information. Then what you learn is that they have to then test the type of vial that it's being held in and the way it's stored and the temperature that it's stored at, like all of these things that we take for granted when you go to your local lab and get a blood draw. But in order to get the accurate results, all of that has to be laid out in a sort of protocol as well. So that's what they're doing now. They'll take that and make sure that when a practice does do a blood draw or a lab does a blood draw, that they know what to do with that blood to be able to get an accurate reading. It's fascinating, and yet it's no wonder things take so long to find outcomes. And I saw the thing that some people don't have access to social media, so I'm still trying to link this document. Give me 2 seconds here. Are there any other questions, Kim, that you saw come up?
I have not, so.
Yeah, this looks like just that virtual education program is what people are looking for.
Yeah. So I want
Right.
to thank both of you for spending this time with us and giving us such great information. There was some absolutely new stuff I hadn't seen before here, and I really appreciate it. And Ollie and all the attendees, I think, also appreciate it. If you want to clap or